Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are at the start of free agency in the 2053 to 2054 offseason. The Rockies at this point are two-time defending World Series champions, and we don't have a ton of holes to fill after we went through arbitration, brought back most of our arbitration-eligible players, signed our starting second baseman, Danny Ruiz, who was headed to free agency, and also made a trade for relief pitcher Tyrone Colbert. So we don't have any huge holes to fill, and we do have about $20 million to spend. So the one obvious hole we need to fill is a backup catcher, and one option is to also just upgrade at catcher. And then the only other real roster spot on the 26-man roster that could be up for grabs is a backup infielder. And similarly, if we find someone who could be a great third baseman, possibly a second baseman, we would bring them on board also. We do have the opportunity to lower our scouting and development budgets materially if we decide that there's somebody we really need to bring on board. But as I said, we have plenty of money right now, I think, for the fact that we're not really going to look to do too much in free agency this year. There are some interesting prospects out there, and we do have a minor league contract offer out to Julio Sanchez, another reliever, which we don't really need at this point. He is a international free agent coming over from Cuba, almost 34 years old, you can see. But with his excellent movement, his ground ball pitcher type, and his ground ball tendencies, I think he could be potentially a very successful pitcher for us in Colorado and bolster our bullpen, possibly even take over as our closer next year. The issue is that we've only got low scouting accuracy on him right now, and it's going to take 3 weeks to get the full report, and he's looking for about $7.5 million a year. So we offered him a minor league contract at the end of our last episode just to get the conversation going with him. Don't anticipate that he will accept that, but I'd also prefer to not make a $7.5 million a year offer to him at the major league level without having a better sense of what his talent looks like. So that's kind of the big guy that we are potentially thinking about in terms of pitching. A lot of experienced and accomplished veterans on the free agent market this year. Most of them, first base, left field, our good buddy Isaiah Hill, starting pitcher, not necessarily areas of need for us. And despite the fact that we do have some money to spend, we'd have to adjust our budgets somehow to be able to bring on any of the top players available. I think at this point we're just going to hold tight. I will perhaps revisit Max Haynow. We're going to pronounce it Haynow for those of you who watched the Larry Sanders show about 30 years ago. But Max Haynow is a free agent catcher. We offered him a minor league deal. He's looking for a little less than $3 million a year. Would be a decent defensive option who doesn't have a horrible bat that we could bring on board to be our backup for Alex Alvarez. Also signing Haynow because he does have 2 option years left would not necessitate putting him on the major league roster. Clearly, if we're spending $2.5 million for somebody, I'd probably prefer that he would be a major leaguer, but we could have him as our third catcher in AAA if we do find someone through trade eventually that we like more than Haynow. You can see that the free agent market for catcher is pretty slim. And it was suggested in the comments of our previous episode by Three Quarters Badger to, do a search for real high-end defensive catchers just to see who's available that we could bring on as a backup. And among the free agents, Haynow is the only one who meets this category that we're looking for, which is a well above average defensive catcher who is at least not a total disaster offensively. And you can see there are a fair number of those players around, including our starting catcher, Alex Alvarez, who's excellent in terms of his catcher ability, above average in terms of his arm, and he's been, on average, for the 3 years with us, I'd say respectable with the bat. He is an Iron Man, and as I said, I do like that good catcher ability. So if he ends up being our starter next year, we would totally be fine with that. And when we just kind of tweak the contact power and I ratings up 5 or 10 points, you can see it gets to a much smaller subset of catchers that we could think about bringing on board. Once again, our Alex Alvarez is one of the 6 people that meets these criteria. Max Haynow is also. So I think what we're going to do, and I have looked at some of these other players who are making big money. I can touch upon them right now. I guess I might as well do that, share some information on our thought process here. Esteban Madrigal is a 35-year-old, like the defense. Just don't think that offensively he's really much of an upgrade from Alex Alvarez, and Alvarez is pretty good defensively also for the money he's making. Not that interesting to me. Rich Pacina from the Guardians, really good catcher ability, bad arm, not the best personality, and again, I just don't know that offensively he's really much of an upgrade from Alex Alvarez. Eddie Williams is a veteran from Milwaukee, very good defensively, good personality. I don't think, again, that he's much of an upgrade from Alvarez, but maybe a little bit. And he's also not making a ton of money next year, so he was a little bit more intriguing. Unfortunately, when I try to trade for him, he exercises his 10-5 rights to veto any trade, so he is not in the mix now. So what I think I'm going to do is make an offer to Haynow, since I can probably trade him away if we make other acquisitions down the line, and at the very least we could stash him in AAA given that he does have options. So I'll actually go do that now before talking about the second part of the plan. Looking for $2.8 million for 1 year. We'll see if we can get him for somewhat less than that, average of $2.5 million over the next 2 seasons, and he's willing to think about it. Ooh, I'm going to make him angry, but I didn't realize I had promised him a starting lineup role. But I don't want to. We'll see what he has to say about that. Okay, yeah, he's going to be a little more difficult. That was my bad for not noticing that I had made him an offer with the starting role promised. All right, we'll give you $2.5 million, but we're not going to guarantee the starting lineup. Hey, now, he's getting angry with us too, so maybe he's just going to walk away. I'd like to bring him on board because, as I said, I think he's a very quality potential backup if everything else doesn't work out. But it doesn't seem like it's going to work out with him right now. He wants more and more money, and he wants to be guaranteed that he's going to be the starter. So we're going to move on from him for the time being and go back here and talk about the last piece of the puzzle, and that's Julio Diaz. If this name is familiar, he's a catcher that back in 2050, when we had the 3rd pick in the draft, we definitely considered taking. Unfortunately for us, as you can see, he was picked 2nd before we picked, so we never had to get into that decision-making process. Our one reservation about him was his lack of intelligence, and have affectionately nicknamed him the lunk-headed catcher when we were talking about what to do in that draft with some of the commenters in that episode from a few seasons ago. But he's very good defensively, and he's got a better bat than pretty much anybody else out there. 88 and 96 OPS pluses aren't great, but they are better than our catcher, Alvarez has been producing, and most of those other guys that we looked at have been producing, and would also tend to think that those numbers would be much higher, playing half of his games in Coors Field. He's also durable as far as his injury proneness. The issue is right now, and I think it's because the early stages of the off season that we're in, the trade demands for him are just insane right now. We've got our prospects here, and you can see if we put in, at least according to potential, Adrian Ortega, Yoel Bueno, Roger Gonzalez, Melvin Armenta. We basically have to give up for the top four, arguably, not actually, because Elijah Smith still technically qualifies as a prospect, but four great prospects to bring him on board, even though I am likely in my final season as GM of the Rockies. I don't want to just totally strip this franchise to the bone. I want to try to play this likely final season somewhat honestly. So I'm just not going to dump all of my prospects, and I'm just not going to totally strip all the money out of the scouting and development budgets. But as the off season does move forward, particularly, if maybe we're able to re-engage with Haynow, maybe bring him on board, and then potentially even use Alex Alvarez in the trade for Diaz as an alternative. He's someone who I may look at bringing on, because I do think that he will give us an upgrade as far as his bat, and with the 65 catcher ability and the 70 catcher arm. He's not quite as good in the catcher ability, which is the more important rating, but he does have a much better arm, and I think he will be more productive in terms of his bat than Alvarez. So there's not a ton of high-end catching talent out there that's good defensively and can also hit a little bit. Diaz is a guy we're going to keep thinking about in terms of a trade over the next few months, but right now my focus is really just kind of hanging out and seeing if the potential price on Diaz will come down, seeing if maybe Haynow will want to re-engage with us at some point, and then seeing if we can string Sanchez along for long enough to get a decent scouting report on him. And thinking about the infield position, I guess, while I'm talking about it, this is one where I'm also going to just kind of wait. You can see the top few second basemen out there are making good money. Juan Castillo, who is a guy who we had on the team in Colorado for a few years. We also had on the team in Pittsburgh for several years. And he was the guy who was the centerpiece of when we traded away the aforementioned Isaiah Hill, who's also a free agent now in Pittsburgh when we couldn't afford him. Castillo was the centerpiece of that trade that we got back from the Dodgers when we basically just had to dump Isaiah Hill's salary. So a player that I'm very familiar with. You can see a pretty average-ish offensive profile, and over the course of his career, he's been a close to average offensive player. Not a great defensive player, but he is versatile enough that he can play second, third, even shortstop in a pinch. So would not be the worst utility infielder to bring on board. Would prefer to not be spending close to $9 million a year on him, and also think that I can probably find someone broadly similar through the trade market if he does end up signing with someone else. Tony Caceres, another guy that we've had in Colorado in the past last season, could fill a very similar role for us also. Not quite as good defensively with that average arm, but a similar bat, similar type offensive player, a few years younger than Castillo. So right now we're thinking about both of them for that potential utility infielder role, and also thinking about doing what we just talked about in the catching market with second baseman and third baseman. If there's an upgrade that we can bring on board, we'll look at that also. But given that we are going to be going for a three-peat next season, if we go into the season with money for free agents available, that's not going to be the worst thing either, because as we get closer to the trade deadline, there will be teams looking to dump talent and we could end up into a similar situation like we were this past year, where we brought on Demetrius Washington right before the trade deadline. We're not going to spend $37 million to bring him back, but we could potentially get a player like him next July to help give us a little boost for our lineup as we again try to go for 3 in a row. So if I don't spend all the money in the next couple of months, it's not going to break my heart. And Max Haynow very quickly came back and said that he's willing to continue discussions with us. Could be good news. Wants a major league contract at $2.6 million, and it looks like he's not looking for a starting role anymore. So maybe we can get him at $2.4 million. His mood is improved a little bit. I'm not willing to think about it. Oh no, he said, So what is his demand? All right, well, it looks like he really was not all that interested in continuing the discussion with us, but we will see what happens in the coming weeks. And Demetrius Washington has now departed our team. Looks like he got $28 million from the Yankees. So for a fragile, soon-to-be 33-year-old, definitely not a contract that we would match. And he got a 5-year deal. So good for Demetrius. Unlikely that we'll be picking him up at the trade deadline this year, because presumably the Yankees are committed to him for some period of time. You can see even with the fan interest crashing, we're still above 100 at that point. But we will take a few more hits as we lose other players, including Rogelio Loera, in the coming weeks. Still have not heard back. Actually, I guess we did hear back from Sanchez. No minor league deal. I'm glad I checked that. I was not paying close. Okay, yeah, we did get an email from him a few days ago that I just ignored. So that was not very kind of me to Mr. Sanchez, because I would like to continue discussions with him. Don't want to offer him $7.6 million, though, although you can see we do have a scouting report on him now, that we are at least high in terms of our scouting accuracy. So we'll go request another. But so we did get that report back a lot quicker than 3 weeks. I guess it's because I didn't have our scout working on anything, but clearly you can tell I'm a little distracted in not paying a lot of attention to the fact that yesterday I got that report on Julio Sanchez, because I just wasn't expecting it to come so soon. I just assumed it was just some random minor leaguer that he decided to, or international player that he decided to scout or something. So it would be helpful if I would pay a little more attention. But given that we've got pretty high accuracy on this profile, I'm definitely going to engage with Sanchez. Again, I want to try to be as reasonable as possible with the money that I'm spending. But as I said, he would be a really good arm in our bullpen if he performs up to these ratings or anywhere near these ratings. He's got the tendencies that I think would play well in Colorado. Got a good personality for the clubhouse. There's a lot going for him. So would definitely want to see what he's looking for. The Mets have made him a good offer, and he's looking for about $7.5 million a year over 4 years. So we will see, and it doesn't look like he's all that enthusiastic. So we're probably going to have to come pretty close to meeting his demands. And he was looking for 4 years at $7.625 million average with a player option in the fourth. We're giving him 4 years with a player option in the fourth at $7.5 million average, structuring it a little lower in this first year. But I would think that he'd at least consider that. And he is willing to think about that offer. So we will see what happens with Blackjack Sanchez as we get closer to the beginning of the winter meetings. And Sanchez claims that our offer is the best out there to him. So that is one piece of positive news. We are now at the start of the winter meetings. We are going to keep our ticket price at $38, which is where we finished off last season for the start. Actually, we're not. We're going to be a little more aggressive. We're getting wild in our old age here. We're the two-time defending World Series champions with 100 fan interest right now. That's going to go down a little bit, but we're going to see how many season tickets we can sell at $40 next year. And it does look like Julio Sanchez is becoming a bit of a bidding war, unfortunately. Like I said, we don't need him. But is he certainly, if we brought him on board, one of the 7 best relievers in our organization? Without a doubt, if those pitching ratings are somewhat accurate. You know, if we compare him to the guy who could be our closer next year, Tawasne Adebamge, he's got similar stuff, much better movement, similar-ish control. They've got similar-ish stamina. Adebamge's fragile. He's a little bit older. Doesn't throw quite as hard. So from that perspective, I guess the control for Sanchez is a little bit lower. But he looks like he could be a really interesting reliever and possibly a closer for us. He's looking for $8 million a year now, but he is willing to still structure something that's a little lighter on the front end, which is kind of what we're going for. And we're close. He says he's looking for 4 years, 8.325. We're going to offer him 4 years at 8.25, lower this upcoming year, and he's willing to think about it. So we increase the total value by about $3 million. We'll see what the veteran has to say. And a couple days ago, Julio Sanchez said we were his be-all and end-all, but now he's looking for an even bigger offer from Washington. So he's starting to get relatively expensive here. Looking for an average of $9.4 million a year. Again, as long as I can keep this next year low, give me as much flexibility as possible. Again, I don't think this is a horrible contract to be putting on the books for Colorado for those out years, given that the expectation, I think, is that he would be the closer. So I'll see if I can come up with something. So we're keeping this next year at $6 million. He's looking for 9.4 average. We're at 9.25. I think he'll consider this. Just a matter of if he gets a better offer from somebody else. And we did get what hopefully will be good news. Julio Sanchez did finally agree to a contract with us today on the day of the Rule 5 draft. So bringing Sanchez on board, big step for our pitching staff. Again, I think I'm inclined to make him our closer. We'll see what the manager thinks initially. Interesting. He puts him in a middle relief role, so that's probably not where he's going to end up, but we'll at least see what everybody looks like in spring training. And right now, we've got 12 pitchers on the team, and that doesn't even include the young reliever Williams, who was up and down between the big club and AAA last year. So kind of feeling like our pitching staff is really set at this point with the addition of Sanchez and then the trade for Colbert right after the end of the regular season, or the end of the postseason more accurately. So we still have those holes at catcher and in the infield. We've still got about $14 million to spend. I think just in terms of flexibility for next season, since it very well may be our last, again, I don't want to totally mess with the long term for these mythical Rockies. So still want to continue investing in scouting and development pretty reasonably, but no longer will be at the maximum in scouting, and no longer will be past that point where further investments in development really start to break down, which is in the mid 30 million range. And you really get those diminishing returns. So potentially a little hit to scouting and development. You can see with the higher ticket prices, we are on track to sell about 1,500 fewer season tickets this coming season than we did last year. A little bit disappointing, but we knew that that was possible, jacking up the prices. Most importantly, though, it looks like if we do sell the 43,000 a game that we're projected to overall now, even though attendance will be down, revenue will be up. And ultimately, that's really what it's all about. And obviously, coming off of a 113-win World Championship season, we will be picking last in the Rule 5 draft. We have in the first 5 years of our playthrough with the Rockies, it is 5 years at this point. I just want to make sure I am not lying to you. History would be where I want to click. Yeah, we've played 5 seasons as the Rockies now. This upcoming one will be our 6th, and we have kept at least one Rule 5 draftee on our 26-man roster coming out of spring training, and then actually through the entire season, at least one player, and I think most often only one player each year. I think it's going to be tough for a Rule 5 draftee to make the roster this coming season, but it doesn't mean that we won't bring some people into camp to at least get a look at them. And our scouting director recommends that we take a familiar name, Danny Rodas. You can see he was with us in Colorado in 2051, so just a few years ago. Was fine, an average-ish type pitcher for us. He is kind of the profile that we've moved on from, though. His movement a little above average, but doesn't have ground ball tendencies, not a ground ball pitcher type. I just don't see any way that he would make our team. Catcher Danny Camarillo, 17-year-old out of Venezuela. Interesting prospect with that catcher ability and the home run power, but he's never played above rookie ball. Clearly, that is not the answer for our backup catcher. But we are going to go against our scouts' suggestion, and we're going to pick up another outfielder, which has been a familiar theme. If you've watched the previous Rule 5 picks, we've ended up with kind of 4th or 5th outfielders on multiple occasions in past years in the Rule 5 draft. Rogelio Romero fits the bill, 22-year-old. He's never been above high A ball, and he split last year between rookie ball, A ball, and high A ball, and he was only a .174 hitter in high A ball, but the profile is of a pretty interesting Coors Field player if that contact and that gap power completely develop with that speed. Potentially a lot of extra base hits, potentially decent home run power. He's durable. Good personality in the clubhouse, can bunt a little bit. Don't love the glove. In fact, I really dislike the glove with that below average range and error rating. He can also play first base, but pretty brutal there. The only thing he's got going for him is that he's 6'4", and he has a pretty good arm for an infielder, but not all that important at first base. I don't know that he'll make the 26-man roster. It would certainly be as a 5th outfielder if he did. But if we have some injuries in spring training, he's at least an interesting prospect to bring on board. So we are going to go ahead and draft a Mr. Romero. And here in the second round, just to have another young arm in camp, we're going to go with the young closer, Victor Alvarez, almost 23 years old, never pitched above A ball. But he has been incredibly productive in the lower end of the Blue Jays minor league system. I don't think he makes the team. He doesn't have the tendencies we're looking for, But he does potentially have plus stuff, plus movement, decent control, two nice pitches for a reliever. I think it is extremely unlikely that we'll be keeping Alvarez, but we're going to at least bring him into camp. And I guess it's a little bit surprising for the defending champions to be one of just 4 teams that picked multiple players, but that is where the Rockies end up after bringing Romero and Alvarez on board. As I mentioned, we've kept a Rule 5 guy 5 years in a row. I would be very surprised if we keep both of these players. In fact, I would be shocked if we keep both of these players. I'd be a little surprised if we end up keeping even one of them. I think Romero is a 5th outfielder, probably has a better chance of making the team than Alvarez, but at least we'll get some more updated scouting reports on these guys, see what they look like in spring training, and maybe they'll surprise us and earn their way onto a roster spot. And we've simmed ahead to January now, so going to check back in on utility infielder and catcher. Looks like Hey Now is still out there. He has not come back to us, so I'm assuming he does not want to speak with us yet. I guess we can check in. He's willing to talk to us again, but he's very angry and he's looking for even bigger money. So I do not have any interest in talking to you, Mr. Hey Now. Take a look at the second baseman, and it looks like Juan Castillo and Tony Caceres are both still out there, and looks like they are among the better players who are out there. So I think it's time for me to really figure out whether I can make a trade to bring on somebody better than either of them, or perhaps just make an offer to bring, I think I would lean towards Castillo over Caceres. I do like the durability and the fact that Caceres is younger, but he's not as good defensively, and he's not as good in the clubhouse. So I'd probably lean towards Castillo. But before I do that, I'm just going to see what, if anything, is available in the trade market at a decent price, because we certainly do have money to bring on a contract at this point. And unfortunately, there's really not anything great on the infield market in terms of being able to pick up a player without giving up the top 5 prospects in our system. Catcher, we're close to needing the top 5 prospects for Danny Ruiz. I think I'm just going to continue to kind of wait a little bit, see if maybe anything does emerge with Mr. Hey Now, which would at least give us 2 catchers for next year. But I feel like we can put a deal together that will get us Julio Diaz in the next month or so if I want to do that. And if I don't get Hey Now, I definitely want to do that. And even if I do get Hey Now, I may want to do that if the price for Diaz comes down a bit. So I think that's kind of where I'm going to use the trade assets, is to maybe bring on Julio Diaz. So from that perspective, I'm thinking about a reunion with Juan Castillo. He's a good, solid utility infielder. He hits decently over the course of his major league career. As we talked about, he's been close to average in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus. Not a great offensive player, although he did lead the league in doubles with us his first season with us in our first year in Colorado when we brought him on board from Pittsburgh. But he's competent at second, third, and even at shortstop. Just a really good utility infielder to have. So we're going to see what it's going to take to bring him on board. Looking for $7.5 a year for 2 years. We're certainly not going to give him that. And he's willing to at least talk about a contract at $6 million a year for 2 years. So we'll submit that offer to Juan Castillo. And if we bring him on board, then catcher is the only other thing that we really need to think about during the offseason. And we've lost another one of our players, left-handed pitcher Victor Fields. He ended up getting $12.8 million a year, which was about what he was looking for. He was also looking for that starting role. Actually, the average is more than 12.8 because it goes up from there. We liked his left-handed arm. There was no way we could guarantee that he was going to be a starter. And his stuff and his control are only average at this point. He's certainly been an effective pitcher for us over the years. But has generally, been trending not in the greatest direction in terms of a lot of his numbers, and feel a lot better with the money that we spent to bring on Sanchez than bringing Victor Fields back to be a reliever for us. So we wish him the best of luck, but we have moved on, and so has he. Still above 100 in fan interest, though, which is nice to see. And the big guy is now gone, Rogelio Loera, the aging superstar. Oof. And he looks pretty rough right now, coming off of that ruptured UCL, another 5 months to recover. Below average stuff in control now. He is just 4 wins away from 300 in his career, so it looks like the Mariners picked him up to maybe get a 300th win out of him over the second half of the year. Fans not happy that Loera's gone, but doesn't have a huge effect because we're still above 100 in fan interest. So we have built up a fair amount of goodwill with the great performance last season and the contracts that we've signed, the players we've traded for, the arbitration eligible guys that we brought back. So still hanging in there in terms of fan interest, not surprisingly, with a huge payroll and a very successful team. So the big question now is what will happen with Castillo and maybe Mr. Hey Now. And just for the record, I am willing to accept that Hey Now is probably not how this name should technically be pronounced, but I like thinking about the old Larry Sanders show, so Max is always going to be Hey Now for me. Another day, another player lost, Latrell Young, the veteran left-handed reliever whose profile just didn't make sense to bring him back, although he's been with us for a good chunk of time at this point. Looks like he's going to the Mets, and looks like we're still hanging in there with all those losses with that 100 fan interest. And we've made it to the start of the preseason. No change in our budget. Juan Castillo just got back to us. Says that right now it looks like we are in the lead, and the preseason is underway today. Still have heard nothing further from Hey Now, and it did look like the price for Mr. Diaz at catcher remains very high. I don't know that it's going to go down materially as we get closer to spring training, but willing to wait because I do think that we can potentially put a deal together to bring him on board. So with that, we are going to call it an episode. We'll come back in our next episode and dig into the preseason and spring training and getting ready for the 2054 regular season. We've got a pitching staff that we're happy with. We've basically got a roster that we're pretty happy with. Just need to bring on a utility infielder, and we've got an offer out there that Castillo favors, and we just need to bring on a backup catcher at a minimum. We'll see if we can re-engage with Hey Now, and then as we've talked about, we will also be one way or another, even if we sign Hey Now, seeing if we can maybe pull a trade together to bring Julio Diaz on board, which would be kind of interesting because we would then have the second pick in the 2050 draft on our team, and he would sometimes be a battery mate with the young Elijah Smith, who was the third pick in that draft, who made his debut for us last year and ended up getting a World Series ring. So I think the plan is pretty clear at this point. We definitely want to bring on a utility infielder. Think that we're set to do that with Castillo. Definitely want to bring on a catcher. Think that we will end up bringing on Hey Now and or Diaz. in the next month or so before spring training starts. And then after that, it's just going to be a matter of hopefully getting through spring training healthy, figuring out exactly who's going to end up making the 26-man roster, and then getting ready to start playing the 2054 season. And we will find out our progress on all of those fronts in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.